Hello, everybody. Just as Jeff said just a minute or so ago, we're just going to give everybody another 30 seconds to a minute before we get underway. All right, I think we might as well get started now. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for tuning in for our 2021 mid-year update. My name is Jacob Gorenkoff, and I am CHRA's Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives. And I'm pleased to be presenting today alongside my colleague and CHRA's Executive Director, Jeff Morrison. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which Jeff and I are currently on in Ottawa is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. And as all of you are joining us today from many places near and far, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Before we get underway with the content of our presentation today, I'd like to just give you a quick run through of our webinar technology for the day. So today's webinar is in real time. You should now be able to see us along with the title screen of today's presentation and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your telephone if you've chosen to dial in. As an added note, we will only be displaying the English slide deck during today's webinar. All registrants should have received the French deck in advance, and we'll also be following up with both copies in English and French of the slide deck after the presentation today. As we're in webinar format, you are all muted. If you wish to ask questions, you may type them in the Q&A section on the webinar control panel at any time during today's presentation. We'll end up addressing as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. I think I can speak for both Jeff and myself when I say that we're really excited to fill you in on what our team's been up to. So on that note, Jeff, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jake, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time during your summer break for some of you to join with us today. I know over the past year and a half and what it's been like that we're all in need of some downtime, of some time away. So we really appreciate you taking the time. I also want to reiterate something that Jake said, that of course we're here on Algonquin territory, on the territory of the Anishinaabe people, and we thank them for letting us live, work, and play here. But, you know, we've also, all of us have been saddened by the tragedy of the discovery of unmarked graves at various residential schools around the country. And I'd just like us all, if we could, to take a moment of silence to think about those young lives that have been lost and what we can all do to pursue reconciliation in our own various ways in our own areas of this country. So if we could just take a moment of silence. Thank you for that. As Jake mentioned, the presentation today will be predominantly in English. The slides will be in English. Mais comme Jake a dit, on a envoyé une copie de la présentation à tous les enregistrants en français aussi. Donc, si vous voulez suivre la présentation en français, tu peux faire ça. Et si vous avez des questions, des commentaires que tu veux faire dans le chat box, nous sommes très heureux de répondre en français ou en anglais. Je vais faire quelques commentaires en français, mais la plupart de mes commentaires sera en anglais. So if you do have questions, comments that you'd like in either English or French, please feel free to include those in the chat box. And although the slides will be in English, all of you have received a copy of the presentation in French, and so you're welcome to follow along with that. And I will be saying a few words in French as we go. The last housekeeping note is that this is meant to be very interactive. Although I'll be providing the presentation, Jake and I will both be providing the presentation, we want to hear from you. So if during the presentation you have questions, comments, concerns, please type those in the chat box. We will try and address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We're going to try and leave about at least 10 or 15 minutes at the to address comments, concerns, questions, or of course at any time. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to email us. As I think I saw Corinne from The town of Cochrane is on the note, or excuse me, is on the presentation today. And as you'll see a bit later when we talk about Rapid Housing Initiative, sometimes all it takes is an email that we can relay to our friends at CMHC to affect change and to change policy. So, and that's what Corinne did earlier this year. So, sometimes a quick email is really productive in terms of affecting change. Next slide, Jake. So what we'd like to do today is really, this presentation is split in two main buckets. The first is really more of an external look, providing you with an update on various national housing strategy programs at the federal level, as well as providing you with an update on where we're at with the urban, rural, northern Indigenous strategy that many of you know has been a top priority for us. We'll then slowly transition to a bit more of an internal look and provide an overview of some of the programs and the events that CHRA will be launching or have launched over the course of 2021. One thing I'll mention is, simply given the sheer amount of developments that have occurred, whether it's through the National Housing Strategy, new federal policy, or various CHRA initiatives, that just because of time limitations, we won't be able to touch on every single program or update. For example, in the NHS, given the sheer diversity of research programs, we won't be touching on that today. We will, however, be touching on a number of the main programs under the NHS. And again, I'll sound like a bit of a broken record, but if you do have questions or comments about anything relating to national housing policy and or CHRA activities, don't hesitate to reach out to us, again, either on the chat or afterwards via email. So that's essentially the structure for today. So we'll start off, Jake, next slide. We'll start off with an overview of some of the key national housing strategy programs. And the first one we'll update you on is the National Coinvestment Fund, which many of you already are familiar with this. This was a program launched in 2018 under the original NHS, offering over $13 billion in low-cost loans and grants for both new construction and the repair of existing housing. As of just a couple days ago, we've received the most up-to-date list of those announced projects under the co-investment. There are currently over $3 billion worth of projects that have already been announced under co-investment, affecting almost 100,000 units. And by that, the 97,000, close to 100,000, are a combination of both new construction and renovation or renewal of existing housing. In fact, sitting here in the city of Ottawa, I believe it was just 2 weeks ago that Ottawa Community Housing received a contribution to repair 11,000 units of their existing stock. So programs and applications are being evaluated and announced. And by the way, I'll put a little asterisk here that we've been noticing over the past few weeks, generally an increase in the number of applications coming out. There could be a reason for that, which we'll get to in a few minutes, but we're definitely seeing programs being rolled out. There was no new money provided to the co-investment fund over the past couple of years, other than in the budget of this year, April 2021, there was an announcement that $750 million of the fund would be essentially front-end loaded, so it would be reallocated to 21-22, so that projects could be rolled out more quickly. In addition, $250 million of the co-investment has been reallocated for projects impacting women fleeing violence. So if you are in that space, then co-investment fund will be definitely prioritizing those type of projects. The other thing we've heard about co-investment really since the start is how difficult it can be to apply through co-investment and to manage the process. We've been working very closely with CMHC to try and influence the design of the program, including its application, and there have been changes made to the application process and procedures. If, however, you are still having problems, if you are encountering issues, concerns in applying through co-investment or with its related policies, please do let us know. We have been able to effect some changes to co-investment based strictly on the feedback we've received from members. In fact, just not that long ago, Romy Bowers, the new CEO of CMHC, please specifically asked us if we do have, if we, or I shouldn't say we, but our members, you, if you're having problems, to please let them know. CMHC does want to fix and work with members to fix those, but we need to know what those are. Jake, next slide. The newest program under the NHS, as many of you know, it was the Rapid Housing Initiative that was originally announced just last September 2020. In that first iteration of the RHI that was announced last September, the program was worth $1 billion, which was split 50-50, 50% going to 16 municipalities, the other 50% going to housing providers under an application process. The application process, which was very quick, wrapped up as of December of 2020. And at the time, 679 applications were received under that first round of RHI funding, of which only 179 were approved, which means 500 applications were unsuccessful or were not provided funding. Now, of those 179 plus the municipal projects, it was estimated at the outset that those would create 3,000 new units of housing. The final number was closer to 4,700. So the program in its first iteration exceeded expectations, which of course is positive. Since that time, since really the start of this year, 2021, we've been lobbying on two fronts. One is to try and convince the federal government to extend the program as part of a round two. The second front was to try and make changes to the RHI that would reflect the concerns that have been expressed to us by you, by our members, so that the program would be a better fit for your needs. We were, to some degree, successful on both fronts when, in April of this year, in the federal budget, the federal government did announce that there would be a round two of RHI, which was valued at $1.5 billion, so an extra 500 million. And then just about 2 weeks ago, Prime Minister Trudeau unveiled the details around this second round of funding, and subsequently we've received additional details from CMHC. Last week in our newsletter, we shared some of those specific details, some of the specific project details around RHI round two. So I would refer you to that, but just a couple quick highlights from the second round. So first of all, of the 1.5 billion, the split is now different. There is now 500 million being set aside for 30 municipalities. So the original round one was 16. They've increased that now to 30 in the second round, and those 30 municipalities are publicly available. And then $1 billion has been set aside via the application process. However, for that $1 billion, the only way at this point to be eligible is if you had originally submitted an application under round one. So in other words, really it's just those 500 proposals, or excuse me, those 500 applications submitted in round one, but that did not receive funding, that are now eligible for round two. I would be really curious to hear folks' feedback on that. We suspect this is going to be a fairly binary reaction, that if you submitted in round one, you're probably pretty happy with this. If you didn't submit, you're probably not. But we would be really curious to hear feedback in terms of folks' feelings about this particular policy. For those 500 or so that are now eligible under the application stream, CMHC has said that they will be reaching out one-on-one to each of those applicants to determine if the applicant is still interested in being part of the process. We know not everyone will be. Some proposals were time sensitive. A building came up, maybe a hotel, but that the deal may no longer be viable. So, it will be up to each applicant to decide if they want to continue on in the process. And every applicant has until the end of August to make that determination. After that end of August period, CMHC will then take the next several months to evaluate. And the understanding is the evaluation process will be wrapped up by about the end of March of next year. At that point, successful applicants will then have 12 months to put in place the projects. With the one exception, and this is again where we were successful in forcing a change under the program, The one exception is for northern projects. We made the case after we heard from several of you that in the north, a 12-month window is simply not enough given the challenges there. So northern projects will have 18 months to be completed. Of those projects, approximately 1/4 will be allocated to women's housing. And this is going to be something interesting to see, is whether in fact of those 500 applications received in round one, but that didn't receive funding, whether in fact the 25% threshold that's been set will in fact be able to be met. So that's, I think, a bit of a to be determined. Now we know that there are probably still additional questions regarding RHI. So Jake is in fact in the process of setting up an information briefing for our members with officials from CMHC. We had hoped by today we'd have the date for that. We haven't yet, but we're hopeful in the next couple of days we should have a date and time. So we'll send that out as soon as we get it, and that will be a chance for folks to have a bit more, who have questions around this round two, to be able to pose them directly. But again, and I really want to reiterate this, if you do have concerns or comments about this round two, please do let us know, because we can start to communicate that to the folks at CMHC. Jake, next slide. Another program under the NHS, as many of you know about, the Federal Community Housing Initiative Phase 2. This is the program that is extending subsidies for housing providers who held federally operating agreements that are set to expire before 2028. This program has already been in place since about 2018. Any provider who is eligible under this program should be receiving a communication from CMHC about 6 months, give or take, before the expiration date of the operating agreement. And again, we'd be curious to hear from folks how well that process has been working. There was always right from the start, though, a big gap in this program, and that is that the program only covered organizations with an expiring operating agreement if the agreement expired after April the 1st, 2016. And we've always known that there were, dozens of providers with operating agreements that expired prior to April 1st, 2016. And the question we've always had for CMHC is why? Why that very arbitrary date? And what are we going to do? And how are we going to help those providers that had expired operating agreements prior to April 1st, 2016? Earlier this year, CMHC did introduce a very short-term, time-limited program, a one-time, one-year support to those pre-2016 operating agreement holders. And it was essentially an application process. If you were eligible, you had, I think, until end of, I think it was March, to apply. And it was essentially a one-shot deal. In the April 2021 budget, there was an announcement of an additional $118 million under this program. And although there has not been an official announcement yet, nor details, what we've understood is that the purpose of this money is to make that permanent, is for those organizations with pre-2016 operating agreements. This money in the budget will essentially allow you to continue on with those subsidies on a more quote unquote permanent basis until 2028. So that's, if you're in that boat, that's good news for you. By the way, one thing we always get questioned about is what about provincial operating agreement holders? There was a separate program under the NHS called the Canada Community Housing Initiative, which is essentially money funneled to the province that is supposed to meet the same objective. In other words, extending subsidies out to 2028. Those programs are all being run by each province and territory. Again, we'd be curious to hear your feedback in terms of whether that money is actually being is actually getting into your hands. One quick final comment on this. This program is only in place to 2028. That sounds like a long way away, but it's really not. That's going to creep up on us very quickly. So starting really with this federal election campaign, which we'll talk about in a minute, we're really starting to put pressure on and start the advocacy to get commitments to make this type of program, to make these subsidies put it on a more permanent footing. Extending them out, every couple of years is okay, but we need some assurance. You need some assurance that these subsidies will be available for the long term. So that work has now already begun. Jake, next slide. Another piece of the NHS that's gotten a lot of attention is the right to housing. And as you'll all recall, back in 2019, Parliament did in fact pass what was called the National Housing Strategy Act, which encoded the right to housing into federal legislation. This right, of course, was always deemed a collective right, a systemic right, a progressive right. It was not an individualistic right. So there is no kind of mechanism by which an individual can go and seek redress, for example, if they're if they're homeless or if they have housing that doesn't meet their needs. And so in doing that, the legislation established two key accountability bodies. The first was the Federal Housing Advocate, which was an individual supported by an office who had the right to essentially investigate issues of systemic barriers to accessing housing, had the right to make recommendations to the federal government. The advocate was never had the power to enact change or to enact policy change directly. It was always in an advisory capacity, but still, it was a fairly strong role. Now, the good news with the advocate is that the office is pretty well established. It's currently, excuse me the pun, it's currently housed within the Canadian Human Rights Commission. The office is almost fully staffed. There's about 10 or a dozen people that have already been hired to support the advocate. They're already doing work in terms of setting up the processes. But there's one thing missing, and that's the advocate, him or herself. It's been a very bizarre situation, to be blunt. That you set up all the structures, you set up the administration, but you don't actually appoint the advocate, him or herself. So this is why you have not yet seen anything come out of that office in terms of public announcement, in terms of release of new tools, in terms of an application process to submit complaints. There's no advocate. We've been asking time and time again, when is the advocate to be appointed? We're constantly told it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Still nothing yet. So we're being patient, but patience has its limits. On the other hand, the second structure under the right to housing is the National Housing Council. That has been appointed. It was appointed in late 2020. Its two co-chairs are Romy Bowers and Tim Richter, who's the CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. It's operational, it's been meeting. It's already established 3 priority areas in which it's working and advising the minister. Those being urban, rural, northern, Indigenous housing, the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing, and improving the overall strategy, including looking at recommendations to address financialization. They're not addressing anything more yet because the advocate has the power to refer other issues to the council. And until the advocate is appointed, they don't want to take anything else on at this time. So again, we're being very patient and we've been very patient in waiting for the advocate appointment, but we're still not there yet. And hopefully that will come soon. Jake? Two other programs that relate more on the homelessness side. As I think most of you know, there was a new federal program, Reaching Home, that replaced the homelessness partnering strategy in 2019. That Reaching Home program has not only received an initial budget of $2.2 billion in over 10 years, but over the past couple months, it's been augmented, and this has really been in response to COVID, providing advisory committees, local advisory committees with additional resources to help protect homeless populations during COVID. The most recent announcements was in the April budget for $567 million, and then a new $45 million program that is intended to be a pilot on veterans homelessness. In addition, in the throne speech last fall, there was as you recall, a commitment to end chronic homelessness in Canada, but this was without timelines or without a defined strategy. So at this point in time, that commitment is more aspirational, but we are pushing the federal government to essentially establish a policy and a plan to not just create this aspirational goal, but to make it real. In addition, the National Housing Strategy contained an announcement on a Canada Housing Benefit. These essentially are portable subsidies that will allow eligible individuals to essentially subsidize their rent. This is all being run through the provinces. So the role of the federal government is really more providing the framework for the program. In fact, this has taken some time for them to roll out. Just last week, in fact, we saw the 8th bilateral agreement signed with the province, that being Alberta. And so we're still not even fully, the agreements, the federal provincial agreements are still not fully in place. And we hope that the remaining provinces and territories will sign these agreements quickly so that we can get this money out the door. By the way, again, would be very curious and interested in any thoughts people had about how this benefit is being rolled out in your jurisdiction and whether it's making a difference. Jake? One organization, one component of the NHS that I'm really always very proud of is the Community Housing Transformation Center. And that's in part because CHRA had really pushed for this concept to be created, and it was. The center is fully open. It has been now for about 2 years, having opened its virtual doors in 2019. For those who are still not familiar with the center, it is really intended to provide contributions, grants, as well as support to individual organizations who are looking to pursue transformation in a couple different ways. One at a local or within the organization approach. The other is in a more sectoral approach. So projects or initiatives you have that will change the sector at a more global level. And then a third program is what's called the community-based tenant initiative. If you have programs or projects or initiatives intended to strengthen your tenant groups or tenant relations, you can apply through this program. There's 5 key areas that the Community Housing Center looks at, and you see those on the screen here. And already, well, at least as of May, 159 projects have already been approved and funded via the Transformation Center, worth over $11 million. So it's humming along, and projects are getting funded. We've actually, I know, received one grant for one project. So if you have projects that may be eligible, don't hesitate. This is a great resource, and we hope folks will use it. Okay. One relatively small piece of the NHS, but I wanted to highlight it, was the Federal Lands Initiative. As someone once said to me, you can't start a housing project without land. And although this is a relatively small piece, only $200 million, we have always said this program has huge potential, and it remains one of our key asks of the federal government to, as I've said before, to put this program on steroids, to really give it an injection of funding so that we can transfer much bigger sums of land, available land, and not just federal, but even provincial or municipal under this program. So far, there's only been 9 parcels of land that have been transferred, which is not a lot. But there are, on the website, there is a web page that actually lists current available plots of land. And for those of you, if anyone's here from Edmonton, and I think I saw a few of you, there are currently 2 plots of land available in Edmonton that are essentially up for transfer. So you can go on the website and see those. But hopefully, we're really hoping is the federal government will really expand this program, because we think there's huge potential there. Jake? I now want to just quickly provide an update on, so that's really what a couple of the key pieces of the NHS. What I wanted to take a moment on is to describe the biggest missing piece from the NHS, which is, of course, the lack of an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy, something that has been an absolute priority for CHRA really for several years now. You'll recall, this was a program, this was a policy that was directly contained in Minister Hussein's mandate letter back in late 2019 when he was appointed minister. So this is part of what is supposed to be his job description. As I should add, we've reminded him from many times. We were being really, I think, led, the signs were very positive that there was going to be a funding announcement for an EARN strategy in the 2021 budget. A lot of signals, a lot of positive signals were coming. So the frustration we felt was palpable when budget 21 came and there was not funding for this program. Massive disappointment, massive frustration. For those of you who saw our budget night reaction, you'll probably have seen that. Now, the response we got from the minister in terms of why it was not in the budget was that there's 2 pieces of work currently still underway. One of those was a parliamentary committee that had been holding hearings into an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy for really the first couple months of 2021. This was called HUMA, the Standing Committee on Human Resources. The minister's response was, we need to get some guidance from this committee before announcing a program. That committee did release its report in May, so just a couple of weeks ago. And the good news was the recommendations were almost identical, were very much aligned with our own for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy that the CHRA Indigenous Caucus released about 2 or 3 years ago. So that's the good news. The bad news is that a committee report is not government policy. It's just that. It's a committee report containing recommendations. Under the parliamentary system, the federal government has 120 days to respond to that report in whatever way it will. We've already understood and had it confirmed from Romy Bowers when we met with her about this a couple weeks ago, that CMHC has been asked to take the lead in formulating the government response. And if you do the math, 120 days puts us at about sometime in September when that response is due. Unfortunately, as we'll talk about in the next slide, that could bump us up against an election. If there is an election to be called before this report gets released, then essentially the committee process is back to square one, which is not what we want. So we've been really pressuring CMHC to get this government response out the door as quickly as possible, and obviously in a favorable manner, which would support all the recommendations in the HUMA report, which again aligned with our own FIBI report. We don't know if that will happen. We're playing a little bit of play it by ear. The other piece of work that the minister has recently asked, in fact, in response to the HUMA committee report, Minister Hussein has asked the National Housing Council that I referred to earlier to do some consultation on the structure of what an Indigenous housing organization, a center, what form that would take. So in other words, the National Council is going to be doing some work over the coming weeks and months to really define what governance would look like, what its roles and responsibilities of a center would look like, et cetera, so that that the council could therefore inform the minister's decision. The CHRA Indigenous Caucus is in fact doing similar work. We're in fact bringing on some consultants to help us do as well a bit of that work regarding what governance and structure and so forth could look like. So there is a bit of duplication here, and we're trying to align ourselves as much as possible. But we need to get this work done quickly. We're all incredibly frustrated that despite years of study and years of meetings and years of hearings on this, that we're still having to go through a process. We need an announcement. Whether that will happen before the election is to be determined. We really hope it will. Jake? Speaking of, and I'm looking at the time, I'm going to try and get through the rest of these slides fairly quickly. Speaking of an election, we don't know when exactly the next election will be called, but all the signs seem to be pointing to an election this fall. Tu peux voir, par exemple, que le premier ministre Trudeau a coupé ses cheveux 2 semaines en passé maintenant, et c'était un peu d'une indication que peut-être il y a une élection qui vient. Et donc, en avance de cette élection, quelques semaines maintenant, on a annoncé une nouvelle campagne, le campagne Voter logement. Ça, c'était une campagne qui était une coalition entre 4 organisations nationales, et tu peux voir ici les 4 organisations qui sont impliquées dans cette campagne. Le but de cette campagne est très simple. Et ça, c'est de mettre le logement sur le radar de tous les partis politiques et des candidats politiques aussi. Et bien sûr, pour assurer que le logement était une priorité pour le gouvernement prochain. And so this Vote Housing campaign that was released in June is really an attempt to put housing front and center on the radar of political parties and candidates. Hopefully you've taken the time to check out the website. I can tell you over the coming weeks, there will be a real focus on grassroots, local organizing. There's a number of initiatives underway. So if you haven't yet gone to the website, I'd encourage you to do so. You can add your name to what we call the pledgers, those who are pledging to vote housing in the coming election. Your organization can also be listed as an endorser, and we really want to bump up that list of endorsers. So we would really encourage you to take part in this campaign. Jake? We know, however, that getting housing on the agenda of whomever forms the next government, although it's important and vital, we also need to be in a position to provide that next government with essentially a roadmap, a blueprint for what the next generation of housing policies need to look like. The last time that CHRA did a real sort of soup to nuts, full scale overview of housing policy from a global perspective was back in 2016 when we were preparing our submission to the NHS consultation. Since then, there have been a lot of new programs and policies introduced. And so we're now due for a refresh to say, okay, given where we're at, given what's happened, what is that next generation of housing policies look like? And so over the coming weeks and months, we're going to be launching this blueprint exercise. Jake is going to be leading that. It's not just about devising or identifying a framework for the next government, but it's also intended to provide a support to CMHC. They have a corporate objective of ensuring that by 2030, every person in Canada has access to housing that meets their needs. We want to help inform them how they can meet that objective. And so this blueprint exercise is intended to do just that. So the phase one of this project is happening right now. We're currently working on a background paper that will provide some background, provide some context for the various issues, provide some discussion questions. The most important phase of this project will be the second, which is the engagement phase. We expect this fall to launch this phase, and this is where we'll have many opportunities for members to weigh in on various housing policies. And again, those will be identified over the summer and as we move into the fall. Once we do that engagement, will be, as I say, fairly extensive. By mid-2022, give or take, we expect to release then the blueprint document, which again will set forth our vision and our roadmap for the next government and the government after that in terms of what housing policy should be and where we should be going. So I really hope you'll all take advantage of this and participate. We can't do this by ourselves. We know the good ideas are with you. And so we look forward to hearing your various thoughts on this exercise. Okay. So quickly just shifting focus to a bit more of an internal look. And again, keep being conscious of the time. Happy to say that our next Congress, which I know many of you have already been asking about, we are expecting it, given the advances we're seeing with COVID and vaccinations. We are expecting and planning for a live event for 2022. That next Congress will take place in Quebec City at the Hilton and the Centre des Congrès. Et donc, on espère que tout vient. On sait qu'avec notre congrès en 2021, qui était virtuel, que beaucoup des gens ont dit, OK, oui, c'était bon, mais ce n'était pas la même chose qu'un événement en personne. Et donc, avec le Congrès du Québec, on espère que c'est la première fois qu'on peut être là en personne depuis 2019. Et donc, nous espérons que tu peux être là. Enregistrement commence peut-être en novembre ou décembre de cette année, mais en septembre, on va envoyer l'information pour les hôtels. Et donc, tu peux faire les réservations dès que septembre. So although registration for Congress will probably not open until late this year, probably November or December, the hotel information will be made available in September this year. We're just working on some better rates for you all. So you can watch for that in the next month or so. And if you're keen, you can already start to make your hotel bookings. By the way, on the slide here, you'll also see our locations and dates for the next couple Congresses. So if you're keen and want to start planning, you can see there what's coming up. Okay. The other event that we're planning is on National Housing Day of this year. So that's November 22nd. Because we're still in potentially a COVID situation, this will be a virtual event, free for CHRA members, but essentially we're planning a symposium for CHRA members focusing on leadership. You know, we know many of you, not many of you, no, we know all of you are leaders within the sector. And so we really wanted to focus it around leadership in a couple different themes: advocacy, diversity and inclusivity, innovation, and leadership for that next generation in the housing sector. So we're going to be releasing information again this fall. It's a busy fall. And we'd encourage you to take part with so many resources, investment coming down the pipe in housing. It's absolutely essential that we have, strong leaders in this sector. And so we're really trying to do what we can to ensure that current generation and next generation of leaders within the sector is well informed and has the skills they need to grow the sector even further. And on that note, Jake, next slide. On that note, you may have seen back in April that we announced at CHRA that we have taken on the Chartered Institute of Housing Canada. So CIH Canada now lives within CHRA. We have a dedicated staff person who's managing that program. Over the past few months, we've been working hard on integrating CIH. The other thing that we've been working on is the courseware. First of all, I think as most of you know, CIH is really a program for accreditation, training, really designed to increase the professionalization within the housing sector. With 108 members, it's still a relatively small program, but we think that that's going to grow. One of our big challenges has been the current courseware, which is currently offered by the CIH's parent, CIH United Kingdom. It's a bit out of date. We've acknowledged. So the current CIH courses will be open as of likely September. Registration will likely start in early August, so watch for that. And those courses will still be eligible towards accreditation. At the same time, however, over the course of the remainder of 2021 and into early 22, those courses will be getting a refresh, will be getting updated, including the generic information as well as the Canadian specific. So there will be in late fall of 2022, there will be essentially a refreshed set of courses offered. However, that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that the current courses are no good, that they're out of date. They're not. They are still perfectly viable. But we are working on a refresh for the program. And I think that was one of the commitments we made when we agreed to take on this program. So we're excited by it. And again, watch for registration information to be coming out in the coming weeks. I'll pass it now over to Jake, and hopefully in the next 5 minutes, Jake can wrap up the next couple slides, and then we'll have a few minutes left for questions. So Jake, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll try to be as quick as possible. So CHRA's webinar series seeks to provide information on ideas, trends, or opportunities of interest to both our members and our partners that are helping us build a stronger housing sector. In a typical year, we typically offer 8 to 10 webinars. This year, we're on track to hold between 17 and 20. So as you see on your screen, we have a number of webinars scheduled over the course of the latter half of the year. The one that's coming up next is on July 22nd. Basically, recognizing the continued growth of modular construction in Canada, and it's important for certain CMHC programs like the Rapid Housing Initiative, we're going to be welcoming a panel of industry experts to impart their experience with modular construction projects next week on July 22nd. They'll be providing their nuanced perspectives, one as a builder, one as a major municipality, and one as a development consultant in a rural community to help you consider whether modular is right for your next housing project. In September, we're going to be welcoming a panel of housing professionals operating at the municipal level, doing work pertaining to the housing strategies in Ottawa, Montreal, and St. John's. They're hard at work building stronger communities within their municipalities, and we would encourage you to join to hear their lessons and insights that can be applied to your communities as well. From September to November, we're going to be welcoming back the great team at FCM's Green Municipal Fund to provide some additional sessions that will help equip providers with knowledge on how their programs can support your projects. I can also confirm that we will definitely be offering 3 other webinars in the summer or fall. Details on these are yet to be completely determined, but in August, we'll be joined by A Way Home for a session on youth homelessness. Sometime this month or in early August, we'll be welcoming CMHC for an info session related to the second round of the Rapid Housing Initiative. And sometime over the fall, we'll be welcoming representatives from the Community Housing Transformation Center related to projects or programs that they're involved in. If there's ever a topic that you think that we should be exploring in a CHRA webinar, I would welcome you to send me an email or give me a call at any time and we can discuss it. So CHRA is the proud administrator of the Housing Professionals Mentorship Program, also known as HPMP. HPMP gathers the housing leaders of today and tomorrow to facilitate mentoring relationships and offer programming around a few key areas. For example, one of those areas is enhancing interest in knowledge around housing through topics such as social housing policy or the relationship between Indigenous reconciliation and housing. Another area is career development through mentorships and programming to build transferable skills through things such as innovative approaches to thinking and problem solving and effectively setting goals. The program runs for a 6-month period from February to July every year. So unfortunately, for those that are really excited about potentially being involved in HPMP this year and haven't been, the program is wrapping up. But the good news is we will be offering it again next year. This year, the cohort featured 37 unique mentor matches spanning 8 provinces and 2 territories. We held a total of 14 sessions and events, all receiving great reviews, as you can see from the quotes on the bottom of that slide, which I'm very pleased about, by the way. So I guess I would sum this slide up as, regardless of where you are geographically within the country or the stage you are in your career, you're welcome and encouraged to apply to be either a mentor or mentee. It would likely be a great experience for you, and I'm feeling pretty confident that next year will be even better than this year, which was one of the highest rated years we've ever had. So you definitely do not want to miss out. So speaking of next year, and well, technically this fall as well, we're going to have quite a few great things related to HPMP in the works. Earlier, Jeff touched on our November symposium for National Housing Day. That evening, after the main part of the programming, we're going to be having an exclusive alumni-only event for networking and some professional development purposes. This is the first of many. It's going to be fantastic. So I feel bad for you if you're missing out on it, but there definitely will be some other opportunities for you if you'd like to get involved with the program in the future. I hope I've piqued your interest in the program, because it definitely is a great program. And if you're feeling enthusiastic, which I definitely am, I hope that you can carry that enthusiasm over for a few months until we open applications at the beginning of October. If you do apply, we'll be sending out acceptances in December. And then in January of the new year, we're going to be introducing mentor matches. And on February 1st of 2022, programming is going to officially get underway. If you are interested in applying, there are 2 important things to note. The first is that participants have to be a member of an HPMP partner organization. So currently that is CHRA, the Chartered Institute of Housing, and Housing Partnership Canada. The other important note is that HPMP is free for mentors, but costs $400 plus tax for mentees. That said, there are a limited number of bursaries available for mentees based on financial need. I'd encourage you all to stay tuned for sneak peeks of HPMP 2022 sessions and events in CHRA's newsletter. And if you're considering participating but aren't sure if HPMP is for you, I would encourage all of you to reach out. You should all have my email from when I sent you the French copy of the slide deck, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. And on that note, thank you all very much for listening to Jeff and I. We'll now open the floor to any questions or comments. If you haven't put them in the Q&A section of the webinar control panel at this time, I would encourage you to do so. Thanks.
Et juste un petit ajout à ça, encore une fois, merci pour votre temps aujourd'hui. Comme Jake a dit, si vous avez des questions, des commentaires aujourd'hui, mais pas seulement aujourd'hui, dans les jours, les semaines prochaines, s'il vous plaît, nous envoyez. C'est très important que nous recevons votre feedback, vos commentaires sur les programmes de la CRU, mais aussi du gouvernement fédéral. Nous assurons qu'on peut représenter tes intérêts avec le gouvernement fédéral avec une sorte d'assurance. Et donc, nous encourageons d'envoyer ces commentaires. So, again, just to say not only thank you, but you know, to really reinforce how important it is for us to get your feedback, to get your comments on issues, whether it's internal to CHRA or, of course, any federal policies or programs. We can only advocate as strongly as with the feedback we receive from you as our members. So I really can't reiterate that feedback loop enough. And Jake, I know there was one question asked about CIH, which is, you know, whether the agreements with partner organizations are being renewed. And the short answer is yes. In fact, many of the partner agreements that CIH has, in particular with provincial organizations, are coming due. The other thing is frankly, they do need to be refreshed, especially given some of the new orientation of CIH, the new upcoming training that's being offered. And so over the coming months, Mary Clark, who's the new general manager of CIH, she will be reaching out, first of all, to those organizations with whom we already have bilateral agreements, but as well to any other, especially provincial organization that would like to have one. And again, we're really open to that sort of feedback. So if you were able to, and if you could let us know, and Jenny, I've taken note, so don't worry about it, I'll pass that on. But yeah, we really look forward to that because we think CIH is a really, there's huge potential there, not just for the program, but to greater professionalize the workforce. And, you know, as we've talked about, this is a sector that is going to be, you know, having a lot of new opportunities come its way over the coming years. We want to make sure that those opportunities are managed well. And une dernière mot sur CIH, on sait que maintenant, le programme est seulement disponible en anglais. Les cours sont seulement en anglais. Une chose qu'on a parlé avec CIH UK, c'est la notion de faire une traduction de tous les cours, ou au minimum quelques cours, pour assurer que les francophones peuvent les prendre et que peuvent prendre en français. Le CIH UK a dit que oui, ils sont ouverts à ça. Et donc, durant les mois qui viennent, on va regarder un processus pour assurer que les cours sont disponibles en anglais et français. Je ne sais pas si on peut finir ce travail par 2022, mais on va espérer et on va travailler pour cette date-là. So what I was just saying is we know currently CIH is currently only offered in English, but we have talked to CIH UK about translating the courses in French so that our Francophone friends and colleagues can take advantage of CIH. There's much openness to that, and so over the coming months, we're just looking at the method and the process for that translation, especially with some of the new courseware coming on. So for those of you who are Francophone, stay tuned. We'll hopefully have some more news to come on that soon.
So we currently don't have any other questions. If anybody has something to ask Jeff or I, please. Oh, there we go. Jeff, I don't know if you want to answer this one or not, but the question is, will the FCM Energy Conservation webinar address carbon tax implications and understanding of how the carbon tax can be factored into the economics of energy conservation? So currently, we're not able to answer that. The specific details of each of those webinars is still in the works, but you will end up getting some additional information as we approach the date of those webinars.
And I think, Jake, you know, that's a good comment, and you know, we can run that by FCM. I think one of the challenges with addressing carbon tax implications is, of course, that the tax is generally it's uneven across the country. In some cases, it's a tax and it's a program that's provincial in nature. Others federally imposed, and so there may have to be some differentiation in how that topic would be addressed. But we will pass that comment on to FCM, and hopefully we can factor that into that. And just another comment I see, Louise, about the urgency of an urban, rural, northern Indigenous strategy. I mean, again, we agree wholeheartedly. You know, I think we've all felt. You heard me say earlier, not just frustration, almost at times a sense of betrayal that the federal government, and yet someone's asking about it, Roger's asking about that now. We've almost sensed a sense of betrayal that the federal government has not yet done this. And I can tell you, they've been, the federal government, federal liberal politicians have been pretty upset with us in terms of how frustrated, how publicly we've expressed our frustration, but we don't care. This is an issue, as Louise says, this is an issue that is front and center. that is directly in Minister Hussein's mandate letter, and we still don't have it. It's been 2 years, at least since the last election, many years prior to that, that we've been asking for this. We know how to do it. We have a roadmap. The HUMA committee provided even more information on a roadmap. So I think there is huge frustration that we're still not there yet. What folks can do, I think, we talked about the Vote Housing campaign. The ask of an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy is the very first ask in that campaign. I would suggest get involved in that campaign, in that Vote Housing campaign, because at the point we're at in the calendar, there's this process I described that the federal government is going through with respect to formulating a response to the HUMA committee. They are currently holding the pen on that and writing that report as we speak. But it will it will take ultimately political pressure to get us over that hump and getting a positive government response. So, that will probably have to take the form of an election. I hate to say it, I don't want to say that, but that's probably the reality. So if you can get involved in that campaign, talk to your candidates about it. I will mention one thing I didn't say in the presentation. We've already met with 4 of the 5 national political parties about our asks with respect to the Vote Housing campaign. So far, all 4 we've met with have been very supportive of the EARN concept, including the Conservatives. So, we're hopeful that the political support is there, whether that's prior to or after the election. But we need to keep that pressure on. Vote Housing offers a platform, offers a forum to do that. Keep doing it on your own, though. It's going to take that political pressure to get us over that final hurdle of a government announcement. And so, we're all so frustrated. I can assure you, our board, our staff, obviously our caucus, that we're not there yet. But we're going to keep fighting, and we're going to make sure that it happens. And whether that's right before an election or right after, the fight will continue. And it's, as I said, it's our top priority.
Thanks, Jeff. So on that note, we currently don't have any other questions in the Q&A function, and our time is almost up. So on that note, I would like to thank you all for tuning in for our mid-year update. Many thanks from Jeff, myself, and the entire staff, really, for participating. And we hope to be able to work with you and collaborate on multiple different initiatives, including Vote Housing and the Housing Blueprint, where we're going to be opening up consultations in the fall. I will end up sending all of you a follow-up email with copies of the slide deck, again, in English and French, along with a post-webinar survey and a link to the recording of today's session as hosted on our website. Thanks again, everybody. And Jeff, if there's anything else you want to add before we sign off, Nope, we're good. All right.
Thanks, Jake. Merci tout le monde. Thank you for taking the time. We're always an email or a phone call away, so never hesitate. And keep doing the great work that you've all been doing during really difficult times. You inspire us, and we hope that we can continue to be a resource and a support for all of the work, the great work that you're all doing. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everybody. Take care and stay safe.